Testing. Testing. Testing.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one indivisible. Please remain standing for a moment of silence.
Thank you, Cubs. You may be seated. The line was be respectful, responsible, safe, and kind. Let's cover consistencies, wash your hands to each other, well, be nice to each other, not to things, and be there for each other.
Attention Cubs, remember to follow the dress code. No polos, must be solid colors, no torn jeans, no Crocs or flippers allowed. Hoodies must be zipped to be clean attire.
Attention Cubs, the end of year awards have been scheduled. Please look at the dates to determine where they will pass you. 6th grade, today at 1 p.m.
7th grade, Wednesday at 1 p.m.
8th grade, Friday at 10 a.m. Attention Cubs, as we approach the end of year, please take note on the following changes. This week, no backpacks will be allowed on campus. On the last day of school, Friday, May 30th, early release at 12:30 p.m.
Let's go to the other
studio for
government.
announcements from our guests.
Good morning, Cubs. Glad to see you all back after a long weekend. Hope you all enjoyed your weekend and you were safe. A few observations I've made this morning. Please make sure that your shorts are appropriate length and that your dresses are appropriate length. Yes, ladies, we do have an award ceremony today, 6th grade. However, you cannot wear short dresses and short dresses with slits. It shows way too much, so we can't have that.
Yeah, we're definitely not trying to see anything.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Also, if you have your backpack with you, please bring it to the office. I have a collection already in my office, and you may pick it up after school today.
Yes, Cubs. And so today and tomorrow, we ask that there not be backpacks. On Thursday, we do understand that there is field day. You probably need an extra change of clothes, maybe a towel if you want to dry off, because we do have water slides and stuff like that. So we'll allow a bag on Thursday for field day, but we don't really need bags today, tomorrow, or Friday.
Also, Cubs, you've been asking about water balloons for field day. No water balloons, no water guns.
Yes, and the reason for that is one, you never know with the gun thing, so we leave that at home. But the balloons also, all of the mess that they make, all the latex that they leave behind is very hard for cleanup, and we don't have a cleanup crew for that. So that is the reason behind that. You still have the opportunity to get wet with the water slides.
Yes.
Also, today is our 6th grade award ceremony at 1:30. Cubs for 6th grade, we will have a sign-out sheet at the awards assembly after the awards. So if your parent does come, they will be able to sign you out after the awards. The same thing for the 7th graders tomorrow and the 8th grade on Friday. We also want to let you know that we are distributing yearbooks today during 4th period. So we will call you out for that. Also, teachers, if you notice on the resource page, there is a lunch A and a lunch B. We are not having den time this week, so please make sure that you follow. 4th period will be extended to meet those den times. So if your first lunch, then you would go to lunch, and then our Cubs will go back to your 4th period. And then if your second lunch, then you'll have an extended 4th period, and then they'll go to lunch. That is for today. Also, congratulations to our faculty for the 8th grade versus faculty basketball game. Although, I will say there were quite a bit of fouls. Sorry, Ms. Brandon, not getting called on our teachers. So definitely a close game. You guys really showed up on both ends. So good job to both sides of the team. 8th grade that did play in the basketball game, please see me at lunch today. All right, Cubs, we love you. We hope you have an amazing short end of last week of 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade, some of you going on to the high school. But we definitely have had a strong year. We want to continue to finish strong. Have a wonderful day, Cubs.
Thank you, Cubs. Thank you. Today's cafeteria menu includes
Nacho cheese walking taco,
mini chicken corn dogs,
Sunflower butter and jelly sandwich.
Chicken patty sandwich.
Spicy pepperoni pizza.
Cheeseburger.
Spicy breaded chicken sandwich.
Cheese pizza.
Grilled cheese.
Turkey and cheese sandwich.
Breaded buffalo chicken salad.
We would like to wish a very special birthday to
Aiden Estrada.
Brian Segovia. Happy birthday!
Cubs,
Let's take a look at the weather for today.
All right. So, good morning, Cubs. Good morning. We are here last week of school. Okay. This morning, we're currently high at 78 degrees. In the afternoon, we're going to rise about 15 degrees to about 93 degrees total. In the evening, dropping down back to 80. And overnight, going back to 70 degrees throughout the day. As you can see, we're not going to get any real high chances of rain. Okay, I do want to again congratulate our faculty and staff for that win. Okay, I had money on you. Although, like Ms. Gallego said, there was definitely some couple of good old fouls, from a couple of big guys. She said, anyway, so good luck to the 8th graders going to high school. Okay, they're doing well, and our 8th graders, our incoming 8th graders, wish you luck this year. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. You go.
This concludes today's announcements. Cubs, remember that we love you.
And Clint Jr.
We are working together for a better tomorrow.